In the golden hour of a Texas dawn in 1892, when morning mist danced across wildflower meadows and the air carried promises of possibility, Elena Martinez walked up the dusty path to Sunset Valley Ranch with nothing but determination in her heart and 37 cents in her worn leather purse. She had answered a simple advertisement in the Cedar Falls Township newspaper. Experienced dairy hand needed, dawn to dusk. Fair wages, apply in person. What she never expected was to meet a gentle giant of a man whose heart had been shattered by loss, whose children desperately needed a mother's touch, and whose ranch held secrets that would transform a desperate woman seeking honest work into the beloved queen of the most prosperous spread in 3 counties. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Marcus Bear Thompson stood 6 feet 8 inches tall, with shoulders broad enough to carry the weight of the world and hands gentle enough to cradle a newborn calf. He had built his empire from nothing, carved prosperity from Texas Prairie through sheer determination and backbreaking labor. But all his success meant nothing when morning came and his children sat at the breakfast table with eyes that had forgotten how to truly sparkle, and his heart ached with a loneliness so profound it threatened to swallow everything he had worked to build. Today, everything would change for both of them, though neither could imagine how a simple job interview would become the first chapter of a love story that would echo through generations. The morning air still held the coolness of night when Elena Martinez stepped off the worn wooden steps of the boarding house in Cedar Falls Township, her modest belongings packed into a single canvas bag that had seen better days. At 26, she possessed the kind of quiet beauty that came from inner strength rather than superficial adornment, with dark hair pulled back in a practical bun and brown eyes that reflected both intelligence and weariness born from too many disappointments. Her dress was simple but clean, mended in places where hard living had taken its toll, yet she carried herself with the dignity of someone who refused to let circumstances define her worth. The job advertisement had been a lifeline thrown to a drowning woman. Elena had arrived in Cedar Falls 3 days earlier, with the last of her savings, fleeing circumstances in San Antonio that had left her reputation in tatters and her heart bruised beyond recognition. Her previous employer, a wealthy banker's wife, had dismissed her without references after her husband had made unwelcome advances that Elena had firmly rebuffed. The scandal that followed painted Elena as the aggressor, a common servant girl who had attempted to seduce a respectable married man. No amount of truth could overcome the power of money and social standing, and Elena found herself blacklisted from domestic service throughout the city. Cedar Falls represented a fresh start, a place where her past wouldn't follow and where honest work might be available for someone willing to earn it through sweat and dedication. She had experience with animals from her childhood, on her grandmother's small farm outside San Antonio, where she had learned to milk cows, tend chickens, and coax vegetables from stubborn soil. Those skills, learned before tragedy scattered her family and forced her into domestic service, might finally prove their worth in this frontier community, where capability mattered more than pedigree. The walk to Sunset Valley Ranch took Elena along a winding dirt road that carved through some of the most beautiful countryside she had ever seen. Rolling hills stretched toward the horizon, covered in spring grass that waved like green silk in the gentle breeze. Ancient oak trees provided patches of shade where cattle gathered to escape the growing warmth of the morning sun, and wildflowers painted the landscape in brilliant splashes of blue, yellow, and red. The air smelled of earth and growing things, so different from the dusty streets and crowded tenements of San Antonio that Elena felt something tight in her chest begin to loosen for the first time in months. As she crested a small hill, Sunset Valley Ranch spread out before her like something from a dream. The main house was a sprawling structure of native stone and weathered wood, with a wide wraparound porch that spoke of evening gatherings and lazy Sunday afternoons. Outbuildings dotted the property like pieces of a well-planned puzzle, each serving its purpose in the complex operation of a working ranch. The dairy barn, her destination, stood closest to the main house, its fresh white paint gleaming in the morning light and smoke rising from the chimney of what appeared to be a small apartment built into its loft. But it was the man emerging from the barn who stopped Elena in her tracks and made her question whether she had the courage to continue forward. Marcus Thompson was quite simply the largest human being she had ever encountered, not fat but massively built, with the kind of presence that filled space even when he stood perfectly still. He wore work clothes that had seen honest labor, his sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms that looked capable of wrestling steers, yet something in the way he moved suggested gentleness rather than aggression. His dark hair caught the morning light, and even from a distance, Elena could see the careful way he latched the barn door, as if everything he touched deserved respectful treatment. Two children appeared from behind the barn, a boy and a girl who shared their father's dark hair and moved with the easy confidence of youngsters raised in wide-open spaces. The boy appeared to be around 8, all arms and legs and boundless energy, while the girl, perhaps 6, stayed closer to her father's side with the cautious awareness that sometimes marked children who had experienced loss. They were beautiful children, clearly well-loved and cared for, yet something in their subdued interaction with their father suggested a household where joy had become a stranger. Elena steeled herself for the encounter ahead, smoothing her skirts and checking that her hair remained neat despite the morning walk. First impressions mattered, especially when you were a woman alone seeking employment from a man who had every reason to be cautious about strangers. She had practiced her introduction during the walk, rehearsing the words that would present her as capable and trustworthy, without revealing the desperate circumstances that had brought her to his door. "Good morning," she called out as she approached the group, her voice carrying clearly across the farmyard. "I'm Elena Martinez. I've come about the position advertised in the newspaper." Marcus Thompson turned at the sound of her voice, and Elena felt the full impact of his attention like a physical force. He was even more imposing up close, with a face that was ruggedly handsome despite the lines of worry that marked his features. His eyes were the color of coffee, warm but guarded, and they studied her with the careful assessment of a man who had learned not to trust easily. When he spoke, his voice was surprisingly gentle for someone of his size, with a slight drawl that marked him as Texas-born. "Miss Martinez," he acknowledged with a slight nod. "I appreciate you making the journey out here. I'm Marcus Thompson, and these are my children, Tommy and Lucy." The children offered shy smiles but remained close to their father, clearly well-trained in caution around strangers. The advertisement mentioned experience with dairy cattle. Marcus continued, his tone businesslike but not unkind. "Might I ask about your background?" It was a fair question, and Elena had prepared for it, though she chose. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Chose her words carefully to emphasize skills while avoiding the painful details of recent events. "I grew up on my grandmother's farm outside San Antonio," Elena replied, meeting his gaze directly. "I learned to milk by hand and manage a small herd, though nothing on the scale of what you have here. I've also worked in domestic service, so I understand the importance of reliability and attention to detail." She paused, then added with a slight smile, "I'm not afraid of hard work, Mr. Thompson, and I learn quickly." Something in Marcus's expression shifted slightly, perhaps responding to the sincerity in her voice, or the way she addressed his children with natural warmth. "The work starts before dawn," he said, testing her resolve. "Milking 12 cows twice daily, maintaining the barn, caring for calves, and whatever other tasks need attention. It's 7 days a week, Miss Martinez, with only Sunday afternoons off for church and rest." "I understand," Elena replied without hesitation. "Hard work has never frightened me, and I prefer to stay busy." She meant it sincerely, having discovered that idle time only gave space for regrets and painful memories to take root. Marcus studied her for another moment, then seemed to reach a decision. "Would you like to see the operation? I believe in letting people know exactly what they're signing up for before we discuss terms." Elena nodded eagerly, grateful for the opportunity to demonstrate her knowledge and genuinely curious about the impressive facility she had glimpsed. The dairy barn was a marvel of efficiency and cleanliness, far superior to anything Elena had experienced on her grandmother's modest farm. 12 brown and white dairy cows occupied spacious stalls, each animal showing the glossy coat and bright eyes that indicated excellent care. The milking area was equipped with modern stanchions and collection equipment, while the feed storage and hayloft spoke of careful planning and substantial investment. "We supply milk, butter, and cheese to Cedar Falls and 2 neighboring towns," Marcus explained as they toured the facility. "Quality is everything in this business. One batch of sour milk or poorly made cheese can destroy a reputation that took years to build." Elena nodded her understanding, noting the attention to detail evident in every aspect of the operation. The cows are gentle, he continued, approaching one of the animals with easy familiarity. But they require consistent handling and respect. They know when someone is afraid or uncertain, and they respond accordingly. As if to demonstrate his point, the cow he approached turned her head toward him with obvious affection, accepting his gentle pat with placid contentment. Elena watched the interaction with growing excitement, recognizing the same connection with animals that she had felt as a child. "May I?" she asked, gesturing toward the cow. Marcus nodded, stepping back to observe as Elena approached the animal with calm confidence. "Hello, beautiful," Elena murmured softly, extending her hand for the cow to sniff before gently stroking her neck. The animal responded immediately, leaning slightly into the touch with a soft lowing sound that indicated approval. Elena felt some of the tension she had been carrying begin to ease as she reconnected with skills and instincts that had lain dormant during her years in domestic service. "She likes you," Lucy observed quietly, speaking for the first time since Elena's arrival. The little girl had been watching the interaction with wide eyes, and her comment drew a smile from her father. "Bessie is one of our best milkers," Marcus explained, "but she can be particular about who handles her. It's a good sign that she's taken to you so quickly." Elena felt a warm glow of pride at the compliment, understanding that this small test had been more significant than it appeared. The tour continued through the rest of the facility, with Marcus explaining the daily routines, seasonal variations, and the higher standards expected of anyone representing Sunset Valley Ranch in the community. Elena listened carefully, asking intelligent questions that demonstrated both her experience and her genuine interest in the work. She could see Marcus gradually relaxing as it became clear that she understood the responsibilities involved and wasn't intimidated by their scope. "The position includes room and board," Marcus said as they concluded the tour. "There's a small apartment in the barn loft that's clean and comfortable, with its own entrance and basic furnishings. Meals would be taken with the family, assuming that arrangement suits you." Elena felt her heart leap at this unexpected generosity, having assumed she would need to continue renting a room in town and making the daily journey to the ranch. "That would be very generous, Mr. Thompson," she replied carefully. "Might I ask about wages?" It was a delicate question, but a necessary one given her precarious financial situation. Marcus named a figure that was more than fair for the work described, actually exceeding what Elena had hoped to earn. "Payment weekly, with a bonus at Christmas if the operation continues to prosper," he added. "I believe in rewarding good work, Miss Martinez, and I expect this position will prove demanding enough to earn every penny." Elena felt tears threaten as relief washed over her, but she maintained her composure with effort born of long practice. "Mr. Thompson, I would be honored to accept the position if you're willing to offer it." She paused, then added with complete sincerity, "I promise you won't regret giving me this opportunity." Something in Marcus's expression softened further, and Elena caught a glimpse of the man behind the careful facade of the successful rancher. "I believe you, Miss Martinez. When can you start?" "Today if you need me to," Elena replied without hesitation. "I have my belongings with me, and I'm eager to begin learning your routines." Marcus glanced at the sun, which had climbed higher during their conversation, then made a decision that would change both their lives. "Then let's get you settled in the apartment, and start with this afternoon's milking. Tommy, Lucy, would you like to help Miss Martinez get acquainted with our girls?" The children nodded enthusiastically, their earlier shyness melting away in the face of their father's obvious approval of the new employee. As Elena followed the small family toward the barn loft that would become her new home, she felt something that had been missing from her life for far too long. It wasn't just the security of steady employment or the relief of having a safe place to sleep. It was the sense of belonging somewhere, of being welcomed into a community however small, where her contributions would matter and her presence would be valued. The apartment was simple but comfortable, with a small sitting area, bedroom and basic kitchen facilities. Windows on two sides provided excellent light and views of the ranch operations, while the furnishings, though modest, were clean and well maintained. Elena set her bag on the bed, and looked around the space that represented a fresh start and new possibilities. "It's perfect," she told Marcus honestly. "Thank you for your trust." He nodded, seeming pleased by her reaction, then gestured toward the window that overlooked the main house. "Dinner is at 6, after evening chores are complete," he said. "Nothing fancy, but there's always plenty. Lucy here is quite the little cook, aren't you, sweetheart?" The little girl beamed at the praise, and Elena felt her heart warm at the obvious affection between father and daughter. "I look forward to it," Elena replied, already imagining the comfort of sharing a family meal after so many solitary dinners in boarding house rooms or servants' quarters. "Should I change clothes before we begin with the milking?" Marcus glanced at her neat but impractical dress and nodded. "Work clothes would be wise. We'll wait for you downstairs." Elena quickly changed into the simpler dress she had brought for manual labor, pinned her hair more securely, and rejoined the family in the barn. The afternoon milking session became Elena's first real test, and she was determined to prove worthy of the trust Marcus had placed in her. Each cow had her own personality and preferences, information that Tommy and Lucy delighted in sharing as they introduced Elena to the herd. Bessie, who had shown initial acceptance, proved to be a steady and productive milker. Molly was more skittish and required gentle conversation to remain calm. Old Pearl was the matriarch of the group, wise and patient, while young Daisy was still learning the routines and needed extra attention. Elena's hands remembered the rhythm of milking more quickly than she had dared hope, the skills returning as if she had never stopped practicing them. Marcus observed her technique with approval, offering occasional suggestions, but mostly allowing her to find her own way with each animal. The children chattered constantly, sharing ranch lore and family stories that painted a picture of a close-knit household that had nevertheless known sorrow. "Mama used to sing to the cows," Lucy mentioned during a quiet moment, her voice matter-of-fact but tinged with wistfulness. "She said it helped them give sweeter milk." Elena glanced at Marcus, seeing the brief shadow that crossed his features at the mention of his late wife. "That's a lovely tradition," Elena replied gently. "Perhaps you could teach me some of the songs she used." Lucy brightened at the suggestion, and Elena filed away another piece of information about the family she was joining. As the afternoon progressed, Elena found herself relaxing into the work and the company in ways she hadn't experienced in years. The children's natural friendliness gradually overcome their initial reserve, and they began including her in their conversations and gentle teasing of each other. Marcus remained somewhat formal, but Elena sensed his watchful assessment, gradually shifting toward approval as she demonstrated competence and genuine care for the animals. The sun was beginning its descent toward the western horizon when they finished the afternoon milking, the last of the milk safely stored and the cows returned to their pasture for the night. Elena felt the satisfying tiredness that came from meaningful physical labor, her muscles pleasantly reminded of work they hadn't performed in far too long. "Well done," Marcus said simply as they secured the barn for the evening. "You have good instincts with the animals, and you work efficiently without sacrificing quality. I think this arrangement will prove beneficial for all of us." Elena felt a warm glow of pride at the praise, understanding that Marcus Thompson was not a man who offered empty compliments. As they walked toward the main house for dinner, Elena reflected on the remarkable turn her life had taken in the span of a single afternoon. This morning she had been a desperate woman with 37 cents and no prospects. Now she had honest work, a comfortable home, and the beginning of what might become genuine friendships with this quietly remarkable family. The main house welcomed them with the warm glow of lamplight and the savory aroma of a home-cooked meal. Elena paused at the threshold, suddenly aware that crossing it would mark another significant moment in her transformation from displaced stranger to valued member of the Sunset Valley Ranch community. Whatever the future held, she was no longer facing it alone. Parts 2. 5. Character Development and Stakes. The dinner table at Sunset Valley Ranch held memories woven into its very grain, each scratch and water ring telling stories of family meals shared across the years. Elena sat carefully in the chair Marcus had indicated, acutely aware that she was occupying a space that held significance beyond simple hospitality. The children flanked their father on either side, an arrangement that spoke of established routines and careful attention to their comfort in a world that had already proven capable of sudden devastating change. Grace Williams had prepared the evening meal, Marcus explained as he carved thick slices from a roast that filled the kitchen with mouth-watering aromas. Grace was the widow from the neighboring property, who had been helping with household management since his wife's passing 2 years earlier. She was a woman of perhaps 50, with graying hair pulled back in a practical bun, and the kind of capable hands that seemed to know instinctively what needed doing. Her presence in the Thompson household was both blessing and reminder, Elena realized, evidence of the community support that had sustained this family through its darkest period, while simultaneously highlighting the absence that still haunted every shared meal. Grace makes the best cornbread in 3 counties, Tommy announced proudly, apparently having appointed himself the family's official spokesperson for culinary matters. She taught me how to make biscuits last winter, but mine always come out looking like rocks. His cheerful admission drew gentle laughter from his father and sister, the sound carrying warmth that spoke of a household where mistakes were met with patience rather than criticism. Lucy nodded solemnly in agreement with her brother's assessment. Daddy says cooking is like taking care of animals. You have to be gentle and patient, and sometimes things don't work out the way you planned, but you keep trying anyway. The 6-year-old's profound observation revealed wisdom beyond her years, shaped by experiences that had taught her about resilience and the importance of persistence in the face of setbacks. Elena listened to the easy conversation flowing around the table and felt something deep in her chest begin to unknot. This was what family dinners should be, she realized. Not the tense formal affairs of her employer's house in San Antonio, where every word was measured and conversations served as performances rather than genuine exchanges. Here stories tumbled over each other as Tommy recounted his day's adventures exploring the creek that ran through the ranch's eastern pasture, while Lucy shared her observations about the barn cats and their elaborate social hierarchy. Marcus participated in the children's chatter with the focused attention of a father who understood that these everyday moments were precious and finite. He asked thoughtful questions about Tommy's creek explorations, genuinely interested in his son's discoveries of unusual rocks and the beaver dam that was affecting water flow to the lower pastures. When Lucy explained her theories about why certain cats were friends while others merely tolerated each other, he listened with the same seriousness he might give to a neighboring rancher's insights about cattle breeding. "Miss Elena," Lucy said suddenly, turning the full force of her attention to their guest. "Do you have any children?" The innocent question hung in the air like a suspended cord, carrying implications that Elena felt unprepared to address. Marcus looked up from his plate, his expression carefully neutral, but Elena sensed his awareness of the personal territory his daughter had inadvertently entered. "No, sweetheart," Elena replied gently, choosing honesty over deflection. "I've never been married, so I don't have children of my own. But I love spending time with young people like you and Tommy." The answer seemed to satisfy Lucy's curiosity without opening doors to more complex questions about Elena's background or the circumstances that had brought her to their table. "That's too bad," Tommy observed with the matter-of-fact sympathy of childhood. "You seem like you'd be a good mama. You're not scared of the cows, and you know how to listen when people talk to you." His assessment, delivered with complete sincerity, brought unexpected tears to Elena's eyes. Children, she had always believed, possessed an uncanny ability to see through pretense to the essential truths about people. Marcus cleared his throat softly, a gentle signal to his children that perhaps they were venturing into territory better left unexplored during a first dinner with a new employee. But Elena appreciated their open curiosity, so different from the careful social distance she had navigated in her previous positions. Here she was being welcomed not just as hired help, but as a person worthy of genuine interest and inclusion. "Tell me about your cows," Elena said, skillfully redirecting the conversation toward safer ground,
while demonstrating her genuine interest in the ranch operations. Tommy mentioned that each one has her own personality. How did you learn so much about them? The question proved to be perfectly chosen, opening floodgates of enthusiastic explanation from both children about the individual quirks and preferences of their bovine charges. Bessie, Elena learned, had been bottle-fed as a calf, and still sought extra attention from humans. Molly was the smartest of the group, capable of opening gate latches if they weren't properly secured. Old Pearl had survived a difficult calving that had nearly cost both her life and her calves, earning permanent status as the most pampered member of the herd. Young Daisy was the daughter of Pearl, inheriting her mother's intelligence but adding a mischievous streak that kept everyone alert. The stories revealed far more than simple agricultural facts. They painted a picture of a family that had built relationships with every creature on their ranch, understanding that successful farming required not just technical knowledge but genuine care for the animals that made their livelihood possible. Elena found herself imagining mornings when she would greet each cow by name, learning their individual needs and preferences, becoming part of the intricate web of relationships that sustained Sunset Valley Ranch. Mama used to say that happy cows give better milk, Lucy mentioned, her voice carrying the careful tone children used when discussing deceased parents. She would visit them every evening after supper, just to make sure they were comfortable for the night. The ritual her daughter described painted a picture of the late Mrs. Thompson as someone who understood that caring for animals extended beyond mere necessity into genuine affection. Marcus nodded slowly, his expression growing distant as he remembered. Your mother had a gift with all living things. Plants grew better for her, animals trusted her immediately, and people found themselves sharing secrets they hadn't meant to tell. His voice carried love and loss in equal measure, revealing glimpses of a marriage that had been partnership in the truest sense. What was she like? Elena asked softly, recognizing that understanding the woman who had shaped this family would help her navigate her own role in their lives. The question seemed to surprise Marcus, perhaps because few people had the courage to ask directly about painful subjects that most preferred to avoid. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, gathering thoughts that were clearly both precious and difficult to express. Catherine was the strongest person I've ever known, he said finally. Not physically, though she could work alongside any man when necessary. Her strength came from something deeper. She could face any challenge with grace, find hope in the darkest situations, and make everyone around her believe they were capable of more than they thought possible. Lucy climbed down from her chair and moved to stand beside her father, leaning against his arm in a gesture of comfort that spoke of established routines for dealing with moments when grief threatened to overwhelm. She had yellow hair like mine, the little girl added, and she knew all the best places to find wildflowers. She made crowns for special occasions and taught me how to braid them so they wouldn't fall apart.
Tommy joined his sister beside their father's chair, the family unconsciously forming a protective circle around their shared memories. She could throw a lasso better than most cowboys, he contributed proudly, and she taught me how to whistle really loud so the horses would come when I called them. The boy demonstrated his skill with a piercing whistle that made Elena smile despite the poignancy of the moment. Elena watched the family's instinctive support of each other and felt her heart ache with recognition of both their profound loss and their resilient love. They had clearly developed strategies for honoring Catherine's memory without allowing grief to consume their daily lives, a delicate balance that spoke of careful attention to each other's emotional needs. She sounds like a remarkable woman, Elena said sincerely. You're all very lucky to have had her love, and she was lucky to have a family that keeps her memory alive so beautifully. Her words seemed to settle something in the atmosphere around the table, acknowledging the ghost that would always be present while affirming that life could continue to hold joy and purpose. Marcus looked at Elena with something approaching gratitude, perhaps recognizing that few people possess the emotional intelligence to navigate such sensitive territory with grace. Catherine would have liked you, he said simply. She always said the measure of a person wasn't their past but their willingness to care for others, especially when caring required sacrifice. The remainder of dinner passed in easier conversation, with talk turning to ranch business and the seasonal demands that structured their lives. Elena learned about the spring calving season that had recently concluded, the summer routines that focused on maintaining pastures and preparing for winter, and the careful planning required to balance cattle operations with dairy production. Marcus proved to be a thoughtful teacher, sharing information that would help Elena understand her role within the larger context of ranch management. As they cleared the table together, Elena felt the satisfaction of a day well begun and the anticipation of challenges she was eager to meet. The children helped with dishes, their cheerful chatter filling the kitchen with warmth that spoke of a household where everyone contributed according to their abilities. When Grace Williams arrived to oversee evening preparations and ensure the children completed their studies, Elena took her leave with genuine reluctance. Walking back to her apartment in the barn loft, Elena reflected on the remarkable transformation a single day had brought to her circumstances. This morning she had been alone and desperate, facing an uncertain future with dwindling resources and no clear path forward. Tonight she was part of something larger than herself, welcomed into a family that had extended trust and inclusion despite knowing virtually nothing about her background or the circumstances that had brought her to their door. The apartment felt different now that it was truly hers, no longer just a temporary shelter but a home that represented new possibilities. Elena unpacked her few belongings with care, placing her grandmother's photograph on the small table beside the window and arranging her books on the shelf Marcus had pointed out during their brief tour. Each item found its place in the space that would shelter her dreams and ambitions as she worked to build a new life. Through her window, Elena could see lights glowing in the main house where the Thompson family was settling into their evening routines. She imagined Marcus helping his children with their lessons, his large hands surprisingly gentle as he guided small fingers through writing exercises or listened to halting recitations of multiplication tables. The picture filled her with warmth and a fierce determination to prove worthy of the trust they had placed in her. Sleep came easily that night, the deep, restorative rest of someone who had found purpose after a long period of drift. Elena's dreams were filled with morning sunshine streaming through barn windows, the gentle sounds of contented cattle, and the laughter of children who had accepted her presence in their lives with the generous hearts of the truly innocent. But it was the memory of Marcus Thompson's careful assessment of her character, followed by his decision to offer not just employment but genuine welcome, that settled deepest in her consciousness. She had spent months believing that her past mistakes had permanently damaged her prospects for happiness and security. Tonight, for the first time in longer than she could remember, Elena fell asleep believing that tomorrow might bring opportunities to build rather than merely survive. The pre-dawn darkness that greeted Elena's first full day at Sunset Valley Ranch felt different from any morning she could remember. Instead of the reluctant awakening that had characterized her days in domestic service, she found herself alert and eager before her makeshift alarm clock had finished its tinny summons. The anticipation of meaningful work, combined with the knowledge that her efforts would directly benefit people who had shown her genuine kindness, transformed the early hour from burden into gift. Elena dressed quickly in the practical clothing she had designated for barn work, pinning her hair securely and checking her reflection in the small mirror above the washstand. The woman looking back at her bore little resemblance to the defeated figure who had arrived in Cedar Falls just days earlier. Purpose, she realized, had a remarkable ability to restore confidence and vitality to even the most discouraged spirits. The main house was already showing signs of activity when Elena stepped outside, with warm light glowing in the kitchen windows and the faint sound of conversation drifting across the farmyard. Marcus had mentioned that they began milking before sunrise to ensure fresh milk was available for the morning delivery to town, a schedule that required precise coordination between all members of the household. The dairy barn welcomed Elena with familiar scents of hay, grain, and the warm presence of animals settling into their morning routines. She had expected to find Marcus already beginning preparations, but instead discovered that he had waited for her arrival, clearly intending to work alongside her during these first days while she learned the specific procedures and standards that maintained Sunset Valley Ranch's reputation for quality. "Good morning," Marcus said, his voice carrying none of the grogginess that might be expected at such an early hour. He moved with the purposeful efficiency of someone whose body had adapted to demanding schedules through years of consistent practice. "I thought we'd work together this morning so you can observe our full routine before taking on increased responsibility." Elena appreciated his thoughtfulness, understanding that watching experienced hands perform complex tasks often revealed subtleties that verbal instruction might miss. She had learned to milk cows as a child, but every operation developed its own refinements and preferences that could mean the difference between good results and excellent ones. The 12 cows that comprised the dairy herd were already waiting in their stanchions, their patient acceptance of the early schedule speaking to months of consistent routine. Each animal showed the signs of exceptional care that Elena had noted during yesterday's tour, from glossy coats that indicated proper nutrition to calm temperaments that suggested gentle, respectful handling. Marcus began with Bessie, the brown and white cow who had shown immediate acceptance of Elena's presence. His hands moved with practiced rhythm as he explained the particular techniques that had proven most effective with each animal, sharing insights gained through years of careful observation and experimentation. Elena watched intently, noting the way he communicated with each cow through gentle words and respectful touch, establishing cooperation rather than demanding submission. The key, Marcus explained as he demonstrated proper positioning, is understanding that we're partners with these animals, not their masters. They give us what we need because we provide what they need, but the relationship only works if both sides feel valued and respected. His philosophy represented a profound shift from Elena's childhood memories of farming, where animals were often viewed primarily as economic units rather than individual beings deserving consideration. Elena's turn came with Molly, the intelligent cow who required careful handling to maintain her cooperation. Under Marcus's watchful guidance, Elena approached the animal with the calm confidence that had served her well during yesterday's introductions. Molly's initial wariness gave way to acceptance as Elena established gentle contact and began the rhythmic motions that would draw forth the rich milk that was the foundation of the ranch's dairy business. "Excellent," Marcus murmured approvingly as Elena found her rhythm with Molly. "You have natural instincts for this work. Many people rush the process or approach the animals with tension that makes them nervous. Your grandmother taught you well." The praise warmed Elena more than it probably should have, given that it addressed professional competence rather than personal qualities, but she had been starved for recognition of her capabilities. The morning routine continued with each cow receiving individual attention that acknowledged her specific needs and preferences. Elena learned that Old Pearl required extra time due to age-related stiffness in her joints, while young Daisy needed distraction through conversation to prevent her from becoming fidgety during milking. The process was both physically demanding and emotionally satisfying, requiring strength, patience, and genuine care for the animals that made it possible. As they worked, Marcus shared stories about each cow's history and personality, painting pictures of individual animals who had become valued members of the ranch family. Elena found herself imagining the relationship she would build with these gentle creatures over the months and years ahead, understanding that successful dairy farming required long-term thinking and consistent devotion to animal welfare. The children arrived as the morning milking was nearing completion, Tommy and Lucy bursting into the barn with the irrepressible energy of youth despite the early hour. They moved immediately to their assigned tasks, clearly accustomed to contributing to ranch operations according to their abilities. Tommy began distributing fresh hay to the stalls while Lucy checked water supplies and refilled containers that had run low during the night. "Miss Elena," Lucy called out cheerfully, "did Bessie behave herself for you this morning? She sometimes gets cranky when she doesn't get enough attention." The little girl's concern for both the cow's comfort and Elena's success revealed the kind of empathy that Marcus and his late wife had obviously worked to nurture in their children. "She was perfect," Elena replied honestly. "I think we're going to be great friends." The statement proved prophetic as Bessie turned her head at the sound of Elena's voice, offering the soft lowing sound that indicated contentment and acceptance. The cow's obvious approval drew delighted giggles from both children and a satisfied nod from Marcus. "Animals know," Tommy observed with the matter-of-fact wisdom of childhood. "Mama always said you can't fool them about who you really are inside. They see past all the things that don't matter and know if you're good or mean." His innocent observation carried profound implications for Elena, who had spent months wondering if her essential character had been permanently damaged by the false accusations that had destroyed her previous life.
Elena felt tears threaten at the unexpected validation from such an unlikely source, but she blinked them back while focusing on the final tasks that would complete the morning milking routine. The rich, creamy milk was carefully strained and stored in the cooling room where temperature control would maintain quality until the afternoon delivery to Cedar Falls Township. Marcus explained the transportation logistics that connected Sunset Valley Ranch to its customers in town, describing the careful handling required to ensure that milk arrived fresh and unspoiled despite the distance involved. Elena learned about the regular customers who depended on their dairy products, from the bakery that used their butter for special pastries to the young mothers who relied on fresh milk for their growing children. Quality is our reputation, Marcus emphasized as they completed the storage procedures. Every bottle that leaves this ranch carries our name and our commitment to excellence. That responsibility extends to everyone involved in the operation, from the people who care for the cows to those who handle delivery and customer service. Elena understood that she was being entrusted with something precious, the good name that Marcus had built through years of consistent excellence and community service. The morning's work concluded with feeding routines that ensured each cow received proper nutrition to maintain both health and milk production. Elena observed the careful measurements and specialized feed mixtures that had been developed to optimize animal welfare while maximizing dairy output. Everything about the operation reflected thoughtful planning and attention to details that less dedicated farmers might overlook. As they walked toward the main house for breakfast, Elena felt the deep satisfaction that came from meaningful physical labor performed in service of worthy goals. Her muscles carried the pleasant tiredness of work well done, while her mind buzzed with new information and growing understanding of the complex enterprise she had joined. Tommy and Lucy flanked her on either side, chattering about their plans for the day and seeking her opinions on various subjects that ranged from the relative merits of different wildflowers to the best strategies for catching fireflies. Their easy acceptance of her presence in their daily routines touched Elena profoundly, reminding her of childhood dreams about having children of her own to guide and nurture. Marcus walked slightly ahead, his attention apparently focused on the tasks that would fill the remainder of his morning. But Elena sensed his awareness of the developing relationships between his children and their new employee. She wondered what he thought about Tommy and Lucy's obvious enthusiasm for her company, whether he welcomed their attachment or worried about the complications it might create if circumstances forced changes in their household arrangements. The breakfast that awaited them in the main house had been prepared by Grace Williams, whose efficient management of domestic duties allowed Marcus to focus his attention on ranch operations. The older woman greeted Elena with warm courtesy, expressing pleasure at having another woman's presence in the household and offering assistance with any needs that might arise as Elena settled into her new position. "It's good to see the children so animated," Grace observed quietly as Tommy and Lucy excitedly recounted the morning's milking adventures. "They've been too serious for youngsters their age, carrying worries that shouldn't burden such young shoulders." Her comment revealed the concerned attention of someone who had watched the Thompson family navigate grief and gradually rebuild their emotional equilibrium. Elena understood that she was witnessing something precious and fragile, the cautious emergence of joy in a household that had learned to guard its happiness carefully. The responsibility of contributing positively to that healing process felt both humbling and inspiring, motivating her to prove worthy of the trust being placed in her presence among them. The morning meal provided opportunity for planning the day's activities and discussing longer-term projects that would occupy their attention over the coming weeks. Elena learned about upcoming cattle sales that would require additional hands for sorting and transport, seasonal maintenance projects that had been postponed during spring calving, and community events that brought neighboring families together for mutual support and celebration. Marcus proved to be a thoughtful leader who solicited input from everyone at the table, including his children, before making decisions that would affect household routines. Elena appreciated his collaborative approach, so different from the authoritarian management style she had experienced in previous employment situations where workers were expected to follow orders without question or contribution. As breakfast concluded and the family dispersed to their various responsibilities, Elena felt a profound sense of gratitude for the opportunity to rebuild her life in such positive circumstances. The work ahead would be demanding, but it would also be meaningful, contributing to an enterprise that served both family needs and community welfare. More importantly, she was surrounded by people who had demonstrated genuine kindness and acceptance, creating an environment where personal growth and emotional healing might finally be possible. Walking back to the barn to begin afternoon preparations, Elena reflected on the remarkable distance she had traveled in less than 24 hours. Yesterday morning she had been a desperate woman with no prospects and dwindling hope. Today she was a valued member of a thriving enterprise, welcomed into a family that had shown her the kind of acceptance she had almost stopped believing was possible. The future stretched ahead with promise rather than dread, filled with opportunities to prove herself worthy of the chances she had been given while building relationships that might sustain and nurture her for years to come. Whatever challenges lay ahead, Elena was no longer facing them alone, and that knowledge transformed everything about how she approached each new day. The afternoon brought Elena's first independent milking session, an opportunity to demonstrate mastery of the techniques Marcus had shared while building confidence in her ability to maintain the high standards that sustained Sunset Valley Ranch's reputation. She approached the task with careful attention to every detail, understanding that successful completion would represent an important milestone in her integration into ranch operations. Each cow received the individualized care that Marcus had emphasized, from Bessie's need for extra attention to Molly's preference for steady conversation during the milking process. Elena found herself developing personal relationships with the animals, understanding their moods and responding to their individual personalities with growing skill and intuition. The children remained nearby, ostensibly helping with various tasks but clearly eager to observe Elena's progress and offer encouragement when needed. Their presence provided both motivation and comfort, reminding Elena that her success would benefit not just herself but the entire family that had welcomed her into their lives. When Marcus returned to inspect the completed work, his expression of approval confirmed that Elena had met the exacting standards required for commercial dairy production. The milk was properly processed and stored, the cows were comfortable and content, and the barn was clean and ready for evening routines. "Well done," Marcus said simply, but Elena heard genuine satisfaction in his voice. "I think you're ready to take full responsibility for morning milking tomorrow. The children can assist with tasks that don't require your direct attention, leaving you free to focus on the animals and quality control." The trust implicit in his decision filled Elena with pride and determination to justify his confidence in her abilities. As evening approached and the family gathered for their second shared meal, Elena felt the deep satisfaction of challenges met and responsibilities fulfilled. She was no longer a stranger seeking employment but a valued member of a functioning household, contributing her skills and efforts to the collective welfare of everyone under the Sunset Valley Ranch roof. The conversation around the dinner table flowed with easy familiarity that included Elena as naturally as if she had always been part of their evening routines. Tommy shared discoveries from his afternoon explorations, Lucy displayed wildflowers she had gathered for the kitchen table, and Marcus discussed plans for upcoming projects that would require Elena's participation and input. When the meal concluded and Elena returned to her apartment for the night, she carried with her the warmth of belonging and the anticipation of tomorrow's opportunities to further prove herself worthy of the remarkable second chance she had been given. The future that had seemed so bleak just days earlier now stretched ahead, filled with purpose and possibility, grounded in relationships that promised mutual support and genuine affection. Sleep came easily once again, the deep rest of someone whose days were filled with meaningful work and whose nights brought the peace of knowing that tomorrow would offer new chances to contribute, to learn, and to build the kind of life she had almost stopped believing was possible for someone with her history and circumstances. In her dreams, Elena saw herself as a permanent part of the Sunset Valley Ranch family, sharing in their joys and sorrows while contributing her own unique gifts to their collective prosperity and happiness. The vision no longer seemed impossible but inevitable, the natural result of hard work, genuine care, and the kind of mutual respect that formed the foundation of all lasting relationships. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities, but Elena faced them with confidence born of successful completion of her first full day as a valued member of the Thompson household. Whatever the future held, she was no longer alone, and that knowledge transformed everything about how she approached each precious moment of the life she was rebuilding from the ground up. Part 6-9, Deepening Bonds and Growing Love. The third week of Elena's employment at Sunset Valley Ranch brought the kind of scorching Texas heat that turned the air itself into a shimmering curtain and sent both humans and animals seeking whatever shade they could find. The dairy cows clustered beneath the spreading oak trees that dotted their pasture, their breathing slow and deliberate as they conserved energy during the most oppressive hours of the day. Even the usually energetic barn cats had abandoned their playful antics in favor of cool spots beneath farm equipment where they could doze through the worst of the temperature. Elena had adapted her routines to accommodate the weather, rising even earlier to complete morning milking before the sun reached its full strength and scheduling afternoon tasks for the blessed relief that came with evening shadows. The work remained demanding, but she had discovered reserves of physical stamina that surprised her, along with an increasing sense of competence that made each successful day feel like a small victory against the circumstances that had nearly destroyed her confidence. It was during one of these sweltering afternoons, as Elena worked to repair a section of fence that had been damaged by restless cattle seeking better grazing, that Marcus approached with news that would fundamentally alter her understanding of the Thompson family's circumstances. He moved with the deliberate pace that extreme heat imposed on even the strongest men, his shirt damp with perspiration, and his usual commanding presence somewhat diminished by the oppressive atmosphere. "Elena," he said, settling onto a shaded stump near where she worked, "there's something I need to tell you about Catherine's death, something that children don't know, and something that affects our safety here at the ranch." His tone carried a gravity that made Elena set aside her tools and give him her complete attention, sensing that whatever revelation was coming would change her perception of their seemingly peaceful existence. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the distant mountains that rose like purple promises against the blazing sky. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of secrets that had grown heavier with each passing month of silence. Catherine didn't die from the fever that took so many people that winter. She was murdered by a man named Vincent Morales, a wealthy landowner from San Antonio who wanted our ranch and was willing to kill for it. The words hit Elena like physical blows, each revelation more shocking than the last. She had assumed, as most people would, that Catherine Thompson had succumbed to one of the many diseases that claimed frontier women despite the best efforts of available medical care. The reality that Marcus was describing painted a far more sinister picture of deliberate violence directed against an innocent woman whose only crime had been standing between a greedy man and the land he coveted. Vincent Morales owns half of San Antonio and has been buying up ranch properties throughout this region for the past 5 years. Marcus continued, his hands clenched into fists that spoke of barely controlled rage. He uses intimidation, financial pressure, and when necessary, violence to force people to sell their land for far less than it's worth. Most families eventually give in rather than risk their lives fighting him. Elena felt her blood turn cold as she processed the implications of what Marcus was telling her. Vincent Morales was not just any wealthy landowner from San Antonio. He was the husband of the woman who had employed Elena as a personal maid, the man whose unwelcome advances had led to Elena's dismissal and the scandal that had destroyed her reputation. The coincidence was too profound to ignore, suggesting connections between their separate tragedies that neither of them could have anticipated. "Marcus," Elena said carefully, her voice barely steady as she prepared to reveal information that might change everything between them. "I know Vincent Morales. I worked for his wife until 3 months ago, when he tried to force himself on me and then blamed me for his behavior when I refused him." The admission hung in the air between them, like a confession of unimaginable complexity. Marcus stared at Elena with an expression that cycled through disbelief, recognition, and finally a kind of terrible understanding. "You worked in his house," he said slowly, as if testing the reality of what she had told him. "You know what kind of man he is, what he's capable of when people stand in his way." The confirmation that Elena possessed first-hand knowledge of their enemy's character seemed to both comfort and alarm him. Elena nodded, her mind racing through memories that took on sinister new meaning in light of Marcus's revelations. She remembered conversations she had overheard between Vincent and his business associates, discussions about land acquisitions, and the various methods they employed to convince reluctant sellers to accept their offers. At the time, she had dismissed such talk as typical business negotiations, but now she understood that she had been witnessing the planning stages of campaigns that involved far more than financial pressure. He visited Catherine personally last spring, Marcus continued, his voice growing
Darker with each word. Offered to buy Sunset Valley Ranch for half its value, claiming that market conditions made our land worth less than we had invested in improvements. When Catherine refused to consider his offer, he became angry, threatening, saying that women shouldn't be making decisions about property that was too valuable for their understanding. The picture that emerged from Marcus's account was one of escalating intimidation that had culminated in violence when other methods failed to achieve the desired result. Elena could easily imagine Vincent Morales's fury at being defied by a woman, having witnessed his explosive temper when his authority was questioned in even minor matters. The man she remembered was capable of extraordinary cruelty when his will was thwarted, especially by those he considered beneath his social status. How did it happen? Elena asked quietly, dreading the answer but understanding that she needed to know the full scope of the danger that surrounded the Thompson family. How did he get close enough to hurt her? The question revealed her growing understanding of frontier security measures and the difficulty of approaching a well-defended ranch without being detected by alert residents. Marcus's face went gray as he recounted the events that had destroyed his family's peace and security. Catherine was visiting Grace Williams, helping deliver a baby for Grace's daughter-in-law. It was a difficult birth that required two experienced women working together through the night. Vincent's men ambushed her on the way home, making it look like an accident when her horse bolted and threw her. The clinical details couldn't mask the emotional devastation that remembering these events cost him. The local sheriff investigated, but Vincent's money bought him alibis and witnesses who swore he was in San Antonio conducting business when Catherine died. Marcus continued. There was no way to prove what everyone in the county suspected, and no one was willing to risk their own families by challenging a man with that much power and influence. The corruption that had protected Vincent Morales from consequences revealed the extent of his reach into local government and law enforcement. Elena felt rage building in her chest as she imagined the helplessness Marcus must have experienced, knowing who had killed his wife but being unable to seek justice through legal channels. The same man who had destroyed her own life through false accusations had murdered Catherine Thompson and escaped punishment through the systematic corruption of officials who should have protected innocent citizens from his predatory behavior. That's why you've been so careful about who you hire, Elena realized aloud. Why you've kept the children close to home, and why Grace Williams helps with household management instead of you hiring a stranger for domestic work. The defensive measures that had seemed like simple caution now revealed themselves as calculated responses to ongoing threats. Marcus nodded grimly. Vincent Morales hasn't forgotten about Sunset Valley Ranch. His agents have been asking questions in town, inquiring about our financial situation and whether I might be more willing to sell now that I'm raising two children alone. They think Catherine's death has weakened my resolve and made me desperate enough to accept their terms. The continued surveillance revealed that Marcus and his children remained targets for a man who would not accept defeat. But you're not, Elena said with fierce certainty. You're not going to let him win by destroying what Catherine died to protect. Her declaration carried the force of someone who had found her own reasons to fight against the man who had caused so much destruction in multiple lives. No, Marcus agreed, his voice carrying renewed strength. This ranch represents everything Catherine and I built together, everything we wanted to leave our children. I'll die before I let Vincent Morales steal their inheritance and profit from their mother's murder. The determination in his voice left no doubt about his willingness to fight regardless of the personal cost. Elena felt something crystallize in her chest as she absorbed the full implications of Marcus's revelations. Vincent Morales had destroyed her previous life through lies and manipulation, murdered an innocent woman to steal her property, and continued to threaten the family that had offered Elena sanctuary and purpose. The coincidence of their shared enemy created a bond that went beyond employment or even friendship, uniting them in a cause that demanded justice for wrongs that had gone too long unpunished. He doesn't know I'm here, Elena said thoughtfully, her mind already working through possibilities for turning her inside knowledge of Vincent's methods against him. If his agents are watching the ranch, they'll report that you've hired a dairymaid, but they won't know my identity or my connection to his household. That gives us an advantage he doesn't expect. Marcus studied Elena's face, perhaps recognizing the same determination that had driven his own resistance to Vincent's pressure. Elena, I can't ask you to involve yourself in this fight. You came here seeking honest work and a peaceful life, not a war against a man who has already proven his willingness to kill anyone who opposes him. His concern for her safety was genuine, but Elena could see in his eyes the hope that she might choose to stand with them despite the dangers involved. You're not asking, Elena replied firmly. I'm choosing. Vincent Morales destroyed my life in San Antonio and murdered your wife to steal your land. I have as much reason to see him brought to justice as you do, and I have information about his methods that might help us protect your family and stop his crimes. The decision felt inevitable, the natural result of finding people worth fighting for after months of believing she had nothing left to lose. The conversation was interrupted by the sound of children's voices calling from the direction of the main house, Tommy and Lucy returning from their afternoon lessons with Grace Williams. Elena and Marcus exchanged a look of mutual understanding that their discussion would continue later, when small ears were not present to overhear details that might frighten them or compromise their safety through innocent comments to the wrong people. We'll talk more tonight, Marcus said quietly as he rose to greet his children. After they're asleep and we can speak freely about what needs to be done. The promise carried implications that extended far beyond simple planning sessions, suggesting that Elena had become a trusted ally in matters that affected the family's survival. As Elena returned to her fence repairs, her mind churned with memories and possibilities that connected her past suffering to present opportunities for meaningful action. Vincent Morales had counted on his victims being isolated and powerless, unable to unite against his predatory schemes. But now he faced opponents who shared information, resources, and most importantly, the kind of motivated determination that came from having everything they valued at stake. The evening meal passed with carefully normal conversation, Tommy and Lucy chattering about their lessons and ranch adventures, while the adults maintained facades of casual interest that masked the serious discussions that would follow once the children were safely settled for the night. Elena found herself studying Marcus with new understanding, seeing past the gentle father and skilled rancher to the man who carried the weight of unsolved murder and ongoing threats against his family. When Grace Williams departed for her own home and the children had been tucked into their beds with stories and goodnight kisses, Elena and Marcus reconvened in the ranch kitchen, where lamplight created a circle of warm intimacy that felt both comfortable and charged with significance. The conversation that followed would determine not just defensive strategies, but the deeper nature of their relationship as it evolved beyond employer and employee towards something that neither of them had expected when Elena first arrived seeking work. Marcus poured coffee from the pot that had been warming on the stove, his movements deliberate and thoughtful as he gathered courage for revelations that would make Elena a full partner in secrets that could determine their family's fate. When he spoke, his words carried the weight of complete trust and the recognition that their shared enemy had created bonds that transcended conventional boundaries. There's something else, Marcus said, settling across from Elena at the scarred wooden table that had witnessed so many family decisions over the years. Something I haven't told anyone, not even Grace. Before Catherine died, she discovered that Vincent Morales has been systematically cheating ranchers throughout the region, using fraudulent surveys to claim portions of their land that legally belonged to the original owners. The revelation added another layer to Elena's understanding of Vincent's criminal enterprise, suggesting that murder was only one tool in a comprehensive scheme to steal property and wealth from legitimate owners. Catherine Thompson had died, not just because she refused to sell her ranch, but because she had uncovered evidence of crimes that could have destroyed Vincent's entire operation if brought to the attention of honest authorities. Catherine was working with a territorial judge in Austin, someone Vincent couldn't buy or intimidate. Marcus continued. She had gathered documents and witness statements that would have proven the fraudulent surveys and forced him to return stolen land to its rightful owners. Her death stopped that investigation, but the evidence still exists, hidden where Vincent's men could never find it. Elena felt excitement building as she realized the implications of what Marcus was telling her. Catherine Thompson had not just been a victim but a fighter who had gathered weapons that could still be used against their common enemy. If that evidence could be delivered to honest authorities, Vincent Morales might finally face consequences for his crimes while the Thompson family regained the security they had lost with Catherine's murder. Where did she hide the documents? Elena asked, her mind already working through possibilities for retrieving and using evidence that could change everything about their situation. And how can we be sure they're still there after all this time? The practical questions reflected her understanding that hope without actionable plans was merely wishful thinking. Marcus smiled for the first time since their conversation had begun, the expression transforming his face and revealing glimpses of the man he had been before grief and responsibility had aged him beyond his years. Catherine was the smartest woman I ever knew, he said with obvious pride. She hid copies of everything in 3 different locations, each one known only to her and protected by methods that would take Vincent's men years to discover even if they knew what they were looking for. The security measures Catherine had implemented revealed a woman who understood the deadly nature of her investigation and had taken steps to ensure that her work would survive even if she did not. Elena felt profound respect for the courage and intelligence of the woman whose place she had inadvertently taken in the Thompson household, understanding that Catherine's legacy extended far beyond the love she had given her family. One set of documents is hidden here on the ranch, Marcus continued. Another is with the territorial judge in Austin, and the third is in a bank vault in Dallas where Vincent has no influence or connections. Catherine made arrangements for all 3 sets to be revealed if anything happened to her, but Vincent's murder was too skillfully planned to trigger the mechanism she had established. Elena absorbed this information while considering the possibilities it created for finally bringing justice to bear on crimes that had destroyed too many innocent lives. With her inside knowledge of Vincent's methods combined with Catherine's carefully gathered evidence, they might be able to construct a case that even corruption couldn't defeat, especially if they could find ways to protect themselves during the dangerous period when Vincent realized his past was catching up with him. What do you need me to do? Elena asked simply, her commitment to their cause requiring no additional motivation beyond the opportunity to honor Catherine's sacrifice while protecting the family that had given her new purpose and hope. How can we use what I know about Vincent's household to help expose his crimes and stop his attacks on your family? Marcus reached across the table and covered Elena's hand with his own, the gesture carrying gratitude and something deeper that neither of them was quite ready to name. I need you to help me retrieve Catherine's evidence from its hiding place here on the ranch, he said quietly. And then we need to plan how to get that information to authorities who can't be bought or intimidated into ignoring crimes that cry out for justice. The touch of his hand sent warmth through Elena's entire body, reminding her that their partnership in this dangerous enterprise was built on foundations that included growing personal feelings as well as shared determination to seek justice. The realization that Marcus trusted her completely, that he had chosen to make her a full partner in matters affecting his children's safety, created intimacy that went far beyond anything she had experienced in her previous relationships. When do we start? Elena asked, her voice steady despite the racing of her heart as she acknowledged the significance of the moment they were sharing. And what do we tell Tommy and Lucy if they notice unusual activity around the ranch? The practical questions reflected her understanding that their fight against Vincent Morales would require careful attention to every detail that might expose them to retaliation. Marcus's thumb traced gentle circles across Elena's knuckles as he considered their options, the unconscious caress revealing feelings that were growing stronger despite the dangerous circumstances that surrounded them. Tomorrow night, he said finally. After the children are asleep and we can work without fear of being observed. As for Tommy and Lucy, we tell them we're doing some maintenance work that's easier to accomplish in cooler evening temperatures. The plan felt both thrilling and terrifying, representing Elena's first active step toward confronting the man who had caused so much destruction in her life and the lives of people she had come to love.
Tomorrow night would mark the beginning of a campaign that could either bring justice and security to the Thompson family or result in consequences too terrible to contemplate. As they finalized details and discussed contingencies, Elena found herself studying Marcus's face in the lamplight, noting the way determination had replaced the grief that had marked his features during their earlier conversations. He was transforming before her eyes from a man haunted by loss into a fighter prepared to reclaim control over his family's destiny, and Elena felt privileged to witness and contribute to that metamorphosis. When they finally parted for the night, with Elena returning to her apartment above the dairy barn, she carried with her the memory of Marcus's touch and the knowledge that tomorrow would bring them closer together in ways that went far beyond their shared commitment to seeking justice. The future that had seemed so uncertain when she first arrived at Sunset Valley Ranch was crystallizing into something that included not just work and security, but the possibility of love and family that she had almost stopped believing was possible for someone with her history. Sleep came slowly that night, Elena's mind too active with plans and possibilities to easily surrender to rest. But when dreams finally claimed her, they were filled with visions of a future where Vincent Morales faced consequences for his crimes while she and Marcus built something beautiful and lasting from the ashes of their separate tragedies. The vision no longer seemed like mere wishful thinking, but a goal that courage and determination might actually achieve. The following day passed with almost unbearable slowness as Elena and Marcus maintained their normal routines while internally preparing for the evening's clandestine activities. The dairy cows seemed to sense the underlying tension, requiring extra attention and gentle handling to maintain their usual cooperation during milking sessions. Tommy and Lucy, with the acute sensitivity of children to adult moods, asked several questions about why everyone seemed so serious, requiring careful deflection that wouldn't arouse further curiosity. Elena found herself studying every detail of ranch operations with new eyes, understanding that their fight against Vincent Morales would require her to know every possible escape route and defensive position if his retaliation proved as violent as Catherine's murder suggested it might be. The peaceful countryside that had welcomed her just weeks earlier now revealed its potential for concealment and protection, while the isolated location that had promised tranquility took on more ominous implications for summoning help if they faced attack. As evening approached and Grace Williams completed her daily assistance with household management, Elena felt anticipation building to almost unbearable levels. Tonight would mark her transformation from victim to active fighter, from someone who had fled Vincent Morales's influence to someone prepared to use knowledge gained through suffering to finally hold him accountable for crimes that had gone too long unpunished. The children's bedtime routine seemed to stretch endlessly, with Tommy requiring extra stories and Lucy needing additional reassurance about imaginary monsters that might be lurking in bedroom corners. Elena wondered if their unconscious minds were picking up signals about real dangers that threatened their security, manifesting childish fears that reflected deeper anxieties about the safety of their carefully reconstructed world. When the house finally settled into the deep quiet that marked successful transition to sleep, Elena and Marcus met in the kitchen with tools and lanterns that would illuminate their search for evidence that could change everything about their situation. The moment felt weighted with significance that went beyond the immediate task, representing their first true collaboration as equal partners in matters that would determine their family's future. "Are you ready for this?" Marcus asked quietly, his voice carrying both concern for her welfare and gratitude for her willingness to share the burdens that had isolated him since Catherine's death. "Once we begin this path, there's no turning back. Vincent will eventually learn that his past is catching up with him and his response will likely be swift and violent." Elena met his gaze directly, her resolution strengthened by the knowledge that retreat was no longer possible even if she wanted to choose it. Vincent Morales had already destroyed her previous life and murdered the woman whose memory blessed the household that had offered her sanctuary. The only choice now was between cowering in fear or fighting back with every resource at their disposal. "I'm ready," Elena replied with quiet certainty. Catherine died protecting this ranch and gathering evidence that could stop Vincent's crimes. The least we can do is honor her sacrifice by finishing what she started. The words felt like a vow that bound her irrevocably to the Thompson family's fate while acknowledging the debt they all owed to a woman whose courage had created opportunities for justice that still awaited realization. Marcus nodded slowly, then led the way toward the secret that would determine whether Catherine Thompson's death had meaning beyond the grief it had caused or whether Vincent Morales would succeed in burying the truth along with his victims. The night ahead would test their courage, their partnership, and their commitment to ideals that required risking everything they had built together for the chance to create something better and more secure. As they stepped into the darkness that concealed both threats and possibilities, Elena felt the weight of destiny settling around her shoulders like a mantle that had been waiting for her to grow strong enough to bear it. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and dangers, but tonight she was exactly where she belonged, fighting alongside someone who had become precious to her for causes that gave meaning to all the suffering that had brought them together. The evidence that would either vindicate Catherine's sacrifice or seal their own fate lay hidden somewhere in the darkness ahead, waiting to be discovered by hands that understood its value and hearts that possessed the courage to use it regardless of the consequences that might follow. Elena had never felt more alive or more certain of her purpose as she followed Marcus into the shadows that held the key to their family's future. The Queen by Sunset Final Act. The hidden compartment beneath the old stone well had remained undisturbed for nearly 2 years, its secrets protected by Catherine Thompson's ingenious design and her husband's careful guardianship of information that could either save or destroy their family. Elena held the lantern steady while Marcus worked to remove the carefully fitted stones that concealed documents capable of bringing down Vincent Morales and his criminal empire. Each piece of evidence they retrieved represented another nail in the coffin of a man who had believed himself untouchable, protected by wealth and corruption from the consequences of his crimes. The leather portfolio that emerged from its hiding place contained maps showing fraudulent property surveys, correspondence between Vincent and corrupt officials, and witness statements from families who had been cheated out of their land through systematic deception. Catherine Thompson had been methodical in her investigation, gathering proof that would be impossible to dismiss or explain away even by the most skilled lawyers that money could hire. Elena felt profound respect for the woman whose courage and intelligence had created weapons that could still strike at their common enemy from beyond the grave. "This is extraordinary," Elena whispered as she examined documents that revealed the scope of Vincent's criminal activities throughout Central Texas. Catherine documented everything, including payments to judges and territorial officials who helped him steal land from legitimate owners. The evidence painted a picture of corruption that extended far beyond simple property theft into systematic undermining of legal institutions that were supposed to protect honest citizens from predatory schemes. Marcus nodded grimly as he secured the portfolio in a waterproof case that would protect its contents during the dangerous journey to Austin, where honest authorities waited to receive evidence that could finally bring justice to victims who had suffered too long in silence. Catherine understood that stopping Vincent would require more than accusations or testimony that he could discredit through intimidation. She gathered proof that speaks for itself, documentation that even his money can't silence or corrupt. The sound of approaching horses shattered the midnight quiet like thunder, multiple riders moving at speed toward the ranch house with the kind of urgency that suggested hostile intent rather than friendly visitation. Elena and Marcus exchanged looks of shared understanding as they realized that their secret activities had somehow been detected. That Vincent Morales had chosen this night to make his final move against the family that had defied him for too long. "Get to the children," Marcus commanded quietly, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to making life or death decisions under pressure. "Take them to the root cellar behind the kitchen and don't come out until I give the all-clear signal. If something happens to me, ride to Austin with Catherine's evidence and make sure the territorial judge sees what she died to protect." The instructions revealed planning for contingencies that he had hoped would never be necessary but had prepared for, with the thoroughness of a man who understood his enemy's ruthlessness. Elena wanted to protest, to insist that they face whatever came together rather than separating when their combined efforts might prove more effective than individual resistance. But the sound of riders dismounting near the main house, accompanied by rough voices issuing orders that carried across the night air, reminded her that Tommy and Lucy's safety took precedence over any other consideration. Those innocent children had already lost one parent to Vincent's violence and could not be allowed to suffer further because of adult conflicts they had no power to influence. Moving with practiced stealth developed during weeks of early morning dairy routines, Elena slipped through shadows toward the house where her charges slept peacefully, unaware that their lives hung in the balance of decisions being made by men who valued property more than human life. The back door yielded silently to her careful touch, testament to Marcus's maintenance of equipment that might prove crucial during emergencies that demanded swift and quiet movement. Tommy and Lucy's bedroom felt like a sanctuary of innocence in a world suddenly filled with deadly threats. Their small forms barely visible beneath quilts that their mother had sewn with love and hope for futures that now seemed terrifyingly uncertain. Elena's heart ached as she gently wakened them, knowing that this moment would mark the end of their childhood security and force them to confront realities that no young minds should have to process. "Miss Elena," Lucy whispered sleepily, her confusion evident as she tried to understand why anyone would disturb her rest during the deep darkness that preceded dawn. "Is it time for morning chores already?" The innocent question revealed how completely the little girl trusted the routines that had structured her life since her mother's death, finding security in predictable patterns that adults had carefully maintained to shelter her from chaos and uncertainty. "No, sweetheart," Elena replied softly, gathering clothes that would allow the children to dress quickly while she explained circumstances that would test their courage and maturity beyond anything they had previously experienced. "Some bad men have come to the ranch, and your papa needs us to hide until he can make them go away. Can you be very brave for me and help your brother stay quiet while we wait in a safe place?" Tommy sat up immediately, his 8-year-old instincts already alert to danger even before his conscious mind had fully processed Elena's words. "Are they the men who hurt Mama?" he asked with the directness of childhood, cutting through adult euphemisms to the essential truth that connected their current crisis to past trauma that had shaped their family's defensive preparations. Elena felt tears threaten as she realized that Tommy understood far more about his mother's death than the adults in his life had assumed. That children's acute awareness had penetrated careful attempts to shield them from knowledge that might give them nightmares.
Yes, she replied honestly, understanding that this moment demanded truth rather than comforting lies that would leave them unprepared for realities they might soon face. "But your papa is very strong and very smart, and he's going to protect us all." The sound of splintering wood from the direction of the front entrance galvanized Elena into action. The violent noise confirming that Vincent's men had abandoned any pretense of civilized behavior in favor of the direct assault that had always been their preferred method of dealing with resistance. Time had run out for careful preparations, leaving only desperate measures that might preserve innocent lives long enough for help to arrive, or for Marcus to overcome odds that seemed impossibly stacked against him. Lucy began to cry softly as Elena helped her into a dress and shoes that would provide protection during their flight to the concealed shelter that Marcus had prepared for exactly this contingency. The little girl's tears were silent, but heartbreaking, evidence of trauma that no child should have to endure, while adults fought battles that would determine whether she and her brother had any future at all beyond this terrifying night. "Remember the game Papa taught you about being very quiet?" Elena whispered urgently as she gathered the children and moved toward the kitchen where the root cellar entrance lay hidden beneath a heavy wooden table that served as both furniture and camouflage. "Tonight we're going to play that game for real, and the prize is keeping everyone safe until morning comes." The attempt to frame their desperate situation as childhood entertainment felt inadequate but necessary, providing psychological framework that might help young minds cope with circumstances that challenged adult comprehension. The root cellar had been designed by Marcus with military precision, incorporating lessons learned during his service in frontier conflicts that had taught him the value of prepared positions and emergency supplies. The underground chamber was large enough to shelter his family comfortably, with stored food and water that could sustain them for days if necessary, along with weapons that a determined defender might use to protect those who could not protect themselves. Elena settled the children in the furthest corner of the cellar where thick earth walls would provide maximum protection from gunfire that might penetrate the house above their hiding place. Tommy had recovered his composure with remarkable speed, his young face set in lines that reminded Elena painfully of his father's expression when confronting difficult decisions that required courage beyond normal human reserves. "Miss Elena," Tommy whispered as sounds of conflict erupted overhead, the crashes and shouts painting vivid pictures of violence that transformed their peaceful home into a battlefield. "If something happens to Papa, will you take care of us?" The question revealed depths of trust and understanding that humbled Elena while simultaneously strengthening her resolve to prove worthy of faith that children had placed in her without reservation. "Nothing is going to happen to your Papa," Elena replied with fierce certainty that drew strength from love rather than logical assessment of their tactical situation. "He's the strongest, smartest man in Texas, and he's fighting for the most important things in the world. Bad men like Vincent Morales can't win against someone who has that much to protect." The declaration felt like a prayer and a promise combined, words that shaped reality through sheer force of will and determination. Lucy crawled into Elena's lap, seeking comfort that transcended physical safety to encompass emotional reassurance that their world would somehow survive the chaos threatening to destroy everything they held dear. Elena stroked the little girl's hair while listening to sounds that suggested the battle above had moved beyond their immediate location, possibly indicating that Marcus had successfully drawn their attackers away from the house where his children sheltered in darkness and fear. The minutes stretched into hours as they waited in their underground sanctuary, measuring time by the gradual fading of violent sounds and the slow return of natural night noises that suggested the immediate crisis might be passing. Elena found herself praying to whatever divine forces might influence events beyond human control, bargaining with fate for the safety of a man who had become essential to her happiness and children who had taught her the true meaning of family. When footsteps finally approached the cellar entrance, Elena tensed for what might be their final confrontation with enemies who would show no mercy to witnesses of their crimes. But the voice that called softly through the concealed opening carried blessed familiarity that transformed terror into overwhelming relief as Marcus announced his survival and the successful conclusion of their ordeal. "Elena, children, it's safe now," Marcus said, his voice hoarse with exhaustion but carrying triumph that spoke of victories won through courage and determination rather than superior firepower. "Vincent's men are gone, and they won't be coming back. We can come out now." The simple words carried implications that would require detailed explanation, but their immediate message was clear. The Thompson family had survived their most dangerous night and emerged victorious against odds that had seemed insurmountable. The reunion that followed was fierce and desperate, all four of them clinging together with the intensity of people who had faced the possibility of permanent separation and found grace in being allowed to remain together. Elena felt Marcus's arms around her with gratitude that went far beyond relief at physical safety, encompassing recognition that they had become a unit capable of protecting each other against whatever threats the future might hold. "What happened?" Elena asked when she could trust her voice to remain steady, though her arms remained wrapped around Marcus as if physical contact could prevent him from ever again being exposed to dangers that might take him away from those who needed him. "How did you stop them when they had overwhelming numbers and the advantage of surprise?" The questions reflected her need to understand how their desperate situation had transformed into victory. Marcus smiled with satisfaction that carried edges of grim justice finally served after years of patient suffering. "Vincent made the mistake of coming personally to witness what he expected to be my destruction. When his men broke into the house and found it empty, he became careless, exposing himself to someone who had been waiting 2 years for exactly such an opportunity." The explanation suggested that their enemy's arrogance had provided the opening that skill and determination had exploited with deadly efficiency. "Catherine's evidence?" Elena asked, remembering the documents that had triggered the night's violence and wondering whether their precious proof had survived the conflict that had determined their family's fate. "Is it safe?" The portfolio represented not just legal ammunition against Vincent's criminal empire, but also Catherine's legacy and their hope for permanent security against future threats. Marcus patted the waterproof case that remained secured to his belt despite the violence he had endured during their confrontation with enemies who would have destroyed anything that threatened their criminal enterprises. Safe and ready for delivery to authorities who can finally bring justice to families that Vincent has victimized throughout the region. Tomorrow we ride to Austin, where honest judges will see evidence that no amount of money can corrupt or destroy. The promise of justice finally served felt almost too wonderful to believe after years of helpless rage against crimes that had seemed destined to go unpunished forever. Elena imagined Vincent Morales facing consequences for his murders and thefts, forced to account for decisions that had destroyed innocent lives in service of greed that recognized no limits or moral boundaries. "What about us?" Tommy asked, with the practical concerns of childhood, cutting through adult preoccupation with justice to address immediate questions about how their daily lives would change now that the threat that had shaped their existence had been permanently eliminated. "Can we stop being afraid now? Can we have friends visit like other families do?" Marcus knelt to bring himself to his son's eye level, his expression carrying the kind of paternal love that transformed ordinary moments into memories that would sustain children throughout their lives. "Yes, son," he said gently. "We can stop being afraid. We can have friends and parties and all the normal life that your mother wanted for you and Lucy. The bad man who hurt our family can't hurt anyone anymore." Lucy clapped her hands with delight that seemed to illuminate their underground shelter more effectively than any lantern could achieve. "Does that mean Miss Elena can stay forever?" she asked with the directness that made adult complications seem unnecessary and artificial. "Can she be our real mama now instead of just our pretend mama?" The innocent question exposed truths that had been growing in all their hearts during weeks of shared challenges and mutual care. Elena felt her breath catch as she realized that Marcus was studying her face with an intensity that suggested Lucy's question had opened discussions that needed to happen between adults who had found love in circumstances neither had expected when they first met. The possibility that their relationship might evolve beyond convenience and mutual assistance into something permanent and beautiful made her heart race with anticipation and hope. "That depends," Marcus said carefully, his eyes never leaving Elena's face as he spoke words that would determine their future together. "Miss Elena came here looking for honest work and she's found that. But maybe she's also found something else worth staying for, something that makes Sunset Valley Ranch feel like home in ways that go beyond employment." The gentle question carried invitation and hope, while respecting her right to choose freely without pressure from circumstances or obligations. Elena felt tears of joy threatening as she realized that the man she had come to love was offering her everything she had dreamed of, but never dared to hope she might actually receive. Family, security, purpose, and most importantly, love that was freely given and joyfully received by people who valued her for qualities that went far beyond her ability to perform useful tasks. "Yes," Elena whispered, her voice barely audible but carrying certainty that resonated through the underground chamber like a bell announcing momentous occasions that would be remembered for generations. "Yes, I want to stay forever. I want to be Tommy and Lucy's real mama and your wife and part of this family in every way that matters." The declaration felt like stepping off a cliff into unknown territory that promised either flight or catastrophe. But Elena had learned that some risks were worth taking regardless of potential consequences. Marcus's smile transformed his entire face, erasing years of grief and worry to reveal glimpses of the man he had been before tragedy had taught him to guard his happiness carefully. "Then let's go upstairs and start planning our future," he said, gathering his children and the woman who had just agreed to become their mother. "We have a wedding to arrange and a ranch to run and a lifetime of ordinary happiness to build together." The emergence from their underground shelter into pre-dawn darkness that held no more threats felt like resurrection. Like being born again into lives that could finally unfold according to their own choices rather than the violent whims of men who dealt in fear and destruction. Elena breathed deeply of air that carried the scent of wildflowers and growing things, symbolizing hope and renewal that had seemed impossible just hours earlier. As they walked toward the main house where lamplight promised warmth and safety,
Elena marveled at the distance she had traveled since arriving at Sunset Valley Ranch, seeking nothing more than honest work and a chance to rebuild her shattered life. Tonight she had gained not just security in love but also the opportunity to honor Catherine Thompson's memory by raising her children with the same devotion and wisdom that their birth mother had provided during her tragically shortened time with them. The sun was beginning to paint the eastern horizon with pale gold light when Marcus gathered his family around the kitchen table where so many important conversations had taken place during Elena's time at the ranch. The familiar setting felt transformed by recent events and new commitments, no longer just the heart of a functioning household but the foundation of a future that stretched ahead with promise rather than dread. "I love you," Marcus said simply, his words addressed to Elena but encompassing the children who had made their union not just possible but necessary for everyone's happiness and security. "I love your courage and your kindness and your willingness to fight for people you care about, even when fighting puts you in danger. Catherine would have loved you too for all the same reasons." Elena felt the last shadows of doubt and uncertainty fade away as she accepted the gift of love that had been offered freely and without reservation by people who had taught her the true meaning of family. The woman who had arrived at Sunset Valley Ranch seeking employment had discovered instead that home was not a place but a collection of hearts that chose to beat together in harmony and mutual support. "I love you all too," Elena replied, her voice steady and sure as she claimed her place in the family that had been waiting for her arrival to become complete. "More than I ever thought it was possible to love anyone. This ranch, this family, this life we're building together. It's everything I never dared to dream I could have." Tommy and Lucy seemed to sense the momentous nature of the commitments being made around their kitchen table, their young faces serious as they absorbed the reality that their family was expanding in ways that would bring security and joy they had almost forgotten was possible. When they moved to hug Elena with fierce affection that spoke of complete acceptance, she felt the last pieces of her heart settle into place with the satisfaction of puzzle pieces finding their perfect fit. As morning light strengthened and the ranch began stirring to life around them, Elena looked through windows that revealed landscape she now saw with proprietorial pride rather than merely aesthetic appreciation. This was her home now, her responsibility and her inheritance from a woman who had died protecting everything that Elena now pledged to nurture and defend with her own life if necessary. The cattle that grazed peacefully in pastures where violence had threatened just hours earlier represented more than agricultural enterprise or economic opportunity. They symbolized stability and continuity, the kind of generational thinking that built lasting legacies through patient work and careful stewardship of resources that sustained families across decades of challenge and change. "When should we have the wedding?" Marcus asked, his practical nature asserting itself even in moments of profound emotion as he began planning the logistics that would formalize their commitment and give legal recognition to the family they had already become in their hearts. "And where should we hold the ceremony? Grace will want to help with arrangements, and the children will have opinions about everything from flowers to food." Elena laughed with pure joy as she realized that she was being included in decisions about her own wedding, treated as an equal partner whose preferences mattered rather than a fortunate beneficiary of male generosity. The respect implicit in Marcus's questions represented everything she had hoped to find in marriage but had almost stopped believing was possible for someone with her history and circumstances. "Soon," Elena replied, understanding that waiting served no purpose when they had already committed their hearts and lives to each other through actions that spoke louder than any formal vows could proclaim. "As soon as we can arrange for a preacher and gather the neighbors who have become our friends. I want Tommy and Lucy to be part of the ceremony to officially welcome me into the family they've already shared so generously." The conversation that followed was filled with happy planning and excited anticipation as they discussed details that would transform their informal commitment into legally recognized union blessed by community support and divine approval. Elena felt herself relaxing into the luxury of making plans that extended months and years into the future, no longer constrained by uncertainty about whether she would have security long enough to see those plans come to fruition. When Grace Williams arrived for her daily assistance with household management, she found a family transformed by love and commitment that had survived their most serious test to emerge stronger and more united than ever before. Her tears of joy at the news of Marcus and Elena's engagement spoke to the concern she had carried for their welfare and her relief that they had found happiness after enduring so much loss and uncertainty. Catherine would be so pleased, Grace said through tears that carried blessing rather than sorrow, understanding that love was not diminished by being shared but expanded through generous hearts that made room for new affection while honoring memories of those who had gone before. She always said that Marcus deserved a woman who could match his strength and kindness, and that Tommy and Lucy needed a mother who would love them as fiercely as she did. The days that followed passed in a whirlwind of wedding preparations and legal proceedings that would formalize Vincent Morales's downfall while securing the Thompson family's claim to property he had tried to steal through violence and corruption. Elena found herself amazed by the efficiency of honest law enforcement when provided with evidence that spoke for itself, requiring no interpretation or explanation that clever lawyers might distort to serve criminal interests. The wedding itself took place on a perfect Texas morning when wildflowers carpeted the meadows around Sunset Valley Ranch and gentle breezes carried the scent of growing things that promised abundant harvests and prosperous futures. Elena wore Catherine's wedding dress, altered with Grace's expert seamstress to fit her different figure while honoring the memory of the woman whose blessing seemed to rest over the entire celebration. Tommy and Lucy served as official witnesses, their faces shining with happiness as they watched their father and the woman they had claimed as their new mother exchange vows that formalized commitments already proven through shared trials and mutual sacrifice. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, the cheers from assembled neighbors and friends seemed to shake the very hills that surrounded their valley home. The reception that followed featured food contributed by every family in the county, music provided by local musicians who understood that community celebrations required everyone's participation, and dancing that continued until stars appeared in clear skies that promised fair weather for the honeymoon journey. Marcus had planned as his wedding gift to his new bride. As evening settled over the ranch and guests began departing for their own homes, Elena found herself standing on the front porch where she had first approached as a desperate woman seeking any honest work that might provide survival. The transformation in her circumstances felt almost too wonderful to believe, like stepping from one life into another that exceeded her most optimistic dreams. Marcus joined her on the porch where they had shared so many important conversations during their courtship, his arms settling around her waist with the possessive satisfaction of a man who had won everything he valued most in the world. Together they watched their children chase fireflies across the lawn where Tommy and Lucy's laughter created soundtrack for perfect moments that would sustain them through whatever challenges the future might bring. No regrets? Marcus asked quietly, his question carrying genuine concern for her happiness despite the obvious joy that surrounded their wedding celebration. No second thoughts about committing your life to a man with children and a ranch that demands constant attention. The possibility that Elena might eventually miss the freedom of her previous independence seemed to worry him despite all evidence suggesting that she had found her true calling in caring for his family. Elena turned in his arms to face the man who had become her husband, her partner, and her anchor in a world that had finally revealed its capacity for kindness and justice. None, she replied with absolute certainty. This is exactly where I belong, with exactly the people I was meant to love. Everything that happened before, all the pain and disappointment and fear, it was all leading me here, to this moment, to this family, to this life, that's more beautiful than anything I ever dared to imagine. The kiss that followed sealed their commitment with passion that promised years of happiness built on foundations strong enough to weather any storms that might threaten their carefully constructed paradise. When they finally separated, both were breathless with anticipation for the private celebration that would continue in their bedroom where they would truly become husband and wife in every sense that mattered. As they gathered their children for final goodnight kisses before the adult portions of their wedding celebration began, Elena reflected on the miraculous journey that had brought her from desperation to joy in the span of a single season. The woman who had taken a job milking cows at dawn had indeed become a queen by sunset, not through accident or fantasy, but through courage, love, and the willingness to fight for happiness that seemed worth any sacrifice required to achieve it. Tommy and Lucy kissed their new parents goodnight, with the sleepy satisfaction of children who had witnessed their world transform into something more secure and beautiful than they had dared to hope was possible. As Elena tucked them into beds in rooms that would soon be expanded to accommodate the siblings she and Marcus hoped to give them, she promised herself that their childhood would be filled with the kind of ordinary happiness that every child deserved but too few actually received. The future stretched ahead, filled with promise morning milkings that would be shared with a husband who valued her contributions, children who would grow up knowing they were cherished, and a ranch that would prosper under management guided by love as well as business sense. Elena had found her calling not just in caring for cattle and managing dairy operations, but in nurturing a family that had been waiting for her arrival to become complete. As she and Marcus finally retreated to their bedroom where wedding night intimacy would consummate their legal and spiritual union, Elena felt profound gratitude for the series of circumstances that had brought them together despite odds that seemed designed to keep them apart. Sometimes, she realized, the most beautiful love stories began with the most desperate circumstances, transforming suffering into strength and loss into the foundation for joy. That was all the sweeter for being unexpected. The woman who had arrived at Sunset Valley Ranch seeking nothing more than honest work and a chance to rebuild her shattered life, was ending her wedding day as the beloved wife of the finest man in Texas and the cherished mother of 2 children who had taught her that family was not determined by blood but by choice, commitment, and the willingness to love without reservation or condition. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities, but tonight Elena Martinez Thompson fell asleep in the arms of the man who had made her dreams come true. Surrounded by the peace that came from knowing she was exactly where she belonged, with exactly the people she was meant to love, in exactly the life she had been destined to live from the moment she first walked up the dusty path, to answer an advertisement for a simple job that had transformed her from desperate stranger into beloved queen of the most prosperous and happy ranch in 3 counties. The stars that shone over Sunset Valley Ranch that night seemed to pulse with approval for love that had triumphed over circumstances designed to destroy hope, for justice that had finally been served to those who thought themselves above consequence, and for a family that had been built from broken pieces into something stronger and more beautiful than anything that had existed before their individual tragedies had taught them the true value of the happiness they had found together. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.